Clenching the worn envelope in her trembling hands, Sarah stared at the bold letters emblazoned across the front. CEAC and DCST. Her heart raced as she read the legal threats, her eyes welling with tears. How dare they? After everything she and her late husband had built together, the Homeowners Association, HOA, now sought to destroy it. With a deep breath, Sarah marched towards the carport, its sturdy frame a testament to the love and labor her husband had poured into it. She couldn't let them take this away, not after he had worked tirelessly to construct it, not after he was gone. The carport was all she had left of him. Steeling her resolve, Sarah approached the HOA president, Ms. Wilson, who stood smugly on the sidewalk, flanked by 2 board members. "This is unacceptable," Sarah cried, her voice quivering with emotion. "My husband built this carport with his own hands. You have no right to demand its removal." Ms. Wilson's thin lips curled into a condescending smile. "I'm afraid the rules are quite clear, Mrs. Hartley. This structure violates our community guidelines, and it must be taken down immediately." Sarah's eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance igniting within her. "My husband is gone, and this carport is all I have left of him. I won't let you take it away from me." The HOA president's expression hardened. "I'm sorry for your loss, but the rules apply equally to everyone. If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to take legal action." Sarah's grip tightened on the cease and desist letter, the paper crinkling in her hands. "Legal action? You're threatening me? After everything I've been through?" She took a step closer, her voice rising with each word. "This carport stays, and if you try to take it down, I'll fight you with every fiber of my being." Ms. Wilson's eyes narrowed, her jaw set in determination. "Very well, Mrs. Hartley, but don't say we didn't warn you." With a curt nod, she turned and strode away, the 2 board members in tow. Sarah watched them go, her chest heaving with a mix of anger and grief. She knew this was far from over, but she was prepared to do whatever it took to protect the last remnant of her husband's legacy. No one, not even the HOA, was going to take this away from her. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself embroiled in a bitter battle with the HOA. Their demands for the carport's removal only intensified, with increasingly threatening letters and phone calls. Each time, Sarah stood her ground, her resolve hardening with every confrontation. One afternoon, as Sarah was tending to her garden, a shadow fell over her. Turning, she found Ms. Wilson and 2 burly men standing at the edge of her property, their arms crossed. "Mrs. Hartley, this is your final warning," the HOA president said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Either you remove the carport, or we'll be forced to take matters into our own hands." Sarah's heart raced, but she refused to back down. "I've told you, I'm not taking it down. This carport was built by my husband, and it stays." Ms. Wilson's lips tightened into a thin line. "Then you leave us no choice." She nodded to the 2 men, who began to advance towards the carport. Panic surged through Sarah as she rushed to stand in front of the structure, arms outstretched. "Stop! Don't you dare touch it!" she cried, her voice laced with desperation. The men paused, eyeing her warily. Ms. Wilson's gaze hardened. "Mrs. Hartley, you're only making this worse for yourself. Step aside, or we'll have you removed." Sarah shook her head defiantly. "I won't let you destroy the last piece of my husband I have left. You'll have to go through me first." For a moment, the standoff hung in the air, thick with tension. Then, without warning, the 2 men lunged forward, grabbing Sarah by the arms and attempting to drag her away. Adrenaline coursing through her, Sarah fought back with all her might, kicking and screaming. "No, leave it alone," she cried as the men wrestled her to the ground. Ms. Wilson watched, her expression a twisted mix of triumph and disdain. "Take her away," she commanded, her voice cold and unyielding. As the men hauled Sarah to her feet, she could only watch in horror as they turned their attention to the carport, their eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Panic gripped Sarah as she watched the two men approach the carport, their bulky frames casting ominous shadows over the structure. She struggled against their ironclad grip, her heart pounding in her ears. "No, please," she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. "Don't do this. That carport means everything to me." The men paused, their hands hovering near the carport's supports. Ms. Wilson stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "Mrs. Hartley, you've left us no choice. This structure is a violation of our community guidelines, and it must be removed. Now step aside, or we'll have you arrested for obstruction." Sarah's mind raced, desperately searching for a way to stop them. She couldn't bear the thought of losing the last piece of her husband. This carport was a symbol of his love, his hard work, his unwavering dedication, and she wasn't about to let them destroy it. With a newfound surge of courage, Sarah wrenched one arm free from the men's grasp and lunged forward, placing herself firmly between the carport and the impending destruction. "I won't let you do this. This carport stays, no matter what you say." Ms. Wilson's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Mrs. Hartley, you're being unreasonable. The rules are clear, and we have a duty to enforce them. If you continue to obstruct us, we'll have no choice but to call the police." Sarah's grip tightened on the carport's support beam, her knuckles turning white. "Then call the police. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is this carport. It's the last thing I have left of my husband, and I'll die before I let you take it away from me." The two men exchanged a glance, their expressions uncertain. Ms. Wilson's face flushed with frustration, her thin veneer of composure cracking. "This is your final warning, Mrs. Hartley. Step aside, or face the consequences." Sarah's eyes blazed with defiance. "No, this carport stays. Do your worst." Tension hung thick in the air as the standoff continued, the fate of the carport, and Sarah's last link to her beloved husband, hanging in the balance. The standoff between Sarah and the HOA representatives stretched on, the air thick with tension and unspoken threats. Sarah refused to budge, her grip on the carport's support beam unwavering, as Ms. Wilson and the two men glared at her with mounting frustration. Suddenly, a voice called out from the nearby sidewalk, "What's going on here?" All eyes turned to see a young man, roughly in his 30s, striding towards them with a concerned expression. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over the scene. Ms. Wilson's lips tightened into a thin line. "This is a private matter, young man. I'd suggest you move along." The man's brow furrowed as he took in Sarah's distressed state and the HOA's confrontational posture. "It doesn't look like a private matter to me. It looks like you're bullying a widow over her late husband's carport." Sarah felt a surge of hope at the stranger's intervention. "Please, you have to help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "They're trying to take down the last thing I have left of my husband." The man's expression hardened as he turned to face Ms. Wilson. "I don't know the details, but I know a power-hungry HOA when I see one. You're not going to bully this woman into removing something that's clearly important to her." Ms. Wilson's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "This is none of your business, young man. This carport is in violation of our community guidelines, and we're simply enforcing the rules. Rules that are clearly being used to hurt someone who's already suffered a great loss." The stranger shot back, his voice firm. "I won't stand by and watch you abuse your power like this." Sarah felt a surge of relief as the young man stepped forward, positioning himself between the carport and the HOA representatives. "If you want to take this down, you'll have to go through me first." Ms. Wilson's gaze darted between the two, her frustration palpable. "This is highly irregular. I demand that you both step aside, or we'll have no choice but to call the authorities." The stranger's expression remained unwavering. "Go ahead. Call them. I'm sure they'll be interested to hear of the HOA's attempts to strong-arm a grieving widow." Tension hung in the air as the standoff continued, the fate of the carport, and Sarah's last connection to her husband, hanging in the balance. The air was thick with tension as the standoff between the stranger, Sarah, and the HOA representatives dragged on. Ms. Wilson's face was flushed with frustration. Her eyes narrowed as she glared at the young man who had stepped in to defend Sarah. "This is highly irregular and unacceptable," she spat, her voice laced with disdain. "I demand that you both step aside immediately, or will have no choice but to call the authorities." The stranger's expression remained unwavering, his stance firm as he planted himself firmly between the carport and the HOA's agents. "Go ahead, call them," he challenged. "I'm sure they'll be interested to hear about the HOA's attempts to strong-arm a grieving widow." Sarah watched the exchange, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe the stranger had stepped in to help her, but she was deeply grateful for his intervention. She knew the carport meant everything to her, and she wasn't about to let the HOA take it away, not without a fight. As the tension continued to build, a sudden commotion from the nearby street caught everyone's attention. A group of people had gathered, drawn by the confrontation, and they were now shouting in support of Sarah. "Leave her alone," one woman yelled, her voice carrying across the lawn. "This is wrong," a man bellowed, his fist raised in the air. Ms. Wilson's eyes widened as the crowd grew, their cries of outrage ringing out through the neighborhood. She exchanged a nervous glance with the two men beside her, their confidence visibly wavering. Seizing the opportunity, the stranger turned to Sarah, his gaze steady and reassuring. "Stay here and keep them away from the carport," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm going to see if I can reason with them." Sarah nodded, her grip tightening on the support beam as the stranger strode towards the crowd, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. She watched with bated breath as he began to speak, his words seemingly calming the gathering storm. Minutes felt like hours as Sarah stood her ground, her eyes darting between the carport and the growing crowd. She could feel the tension slowly dissipating, replaced by a sense of cautious hope. Finally, the stranger returned, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "It's done," he announced. "The HOA has agreed to back off, at least for now." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, and she couldn't resist the urge to embrace the stranger, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." The stranger simply smiled, his eyes shining with compassion. "You don't have to," he replied. "I'm just glad I could help." As the HOA representatives skulked away, Sarah knew that this battle was far from over. But for now, her beloved carport was safe, and she had a newfound ally in the most unexpected of places. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself buoyed by the unexpected support of the stranger who had come to her defense. Word of the confrontation had spread quickly through the neighborhood, and soon, Sarah found herself surrounded by a community of allies rallying to her cause. The stranger, whose name she later learned was Alex, proved to be a tireless advocate. He reached out to local news outlets, sharing Sarah's story and drumming up public support for her fight against the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Before long, her plight had become a symbol of the struggles faced by homeowners across the country, caught in the web of overbearing, power-hungry homeowners associations. As the media attention grew, the HOA found itself on the defensive, its members forced to justify their actions and their rigid, often arbitrary rules. Sarah watched with a mix of relief and satisfaction as Ms. Wilson and her cohorts were put on the defensive, their once unassailable authority now questioned and challenged. But the battle was far from over. The HOA, unwilling to back down, continued to send Sarah threatening letters and make ominous phone calls, warning her that the carport's fate was not yet sealed. They vowed to take the matter to court, determined to force her hand and remove the structure that had become a rallying cry for homeowners' rights. Undaunted, Sarah found strength in the support of her newfound allies. With Alex by her side, She prepared to fight the HOA on their own terms, hiring a skilled legal team and mobilizing the community to stand firm against their intimidation tactics. As the case wound its way through the courts, Sarah's story captured the attention of local and national media outlets. Reporters flocked to her doorstep, eager to document the ongoing battle and the broader implications it held for homeowners across the country. Through it all, Sarah remained steadfast, her resolve strengthened by the memory of her late husband and the knowledge that she was fighting for something greater than just her own personal struggle. This was a fight for the rights of all homeowners, for the freedom to maintain the legacies of their loved ones, and for the right to live in their homes without the constant threat of overbearing and unjust HOA oversight. As the final showdown with the HOA loomed, Sarah knew that the stakes had never been higher. But with the support of her community and the unwavering determination that had carried her through the darkest of days, she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The final showdown with the HOA arrived, and the courtroom was packed with onlookers, reporters, and members of the community who had rallied behind Sarah's cause. The air was thick with tension as the two sides faced off, their legal teams armed with an array of arguments and evidence. Sarah sat at the table, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the framed photograph of her late husband that she had brought with her. She knew that this was the moment that would determine the fate of the carport, and by extension, the last remnant of her husband's legacy. As the proceedings began, the HOA's lawyers unleashed a barrage of accusations, citing the community's guidelines and regulations as justification for their demand to have the carport removed. They argued that the structure was an eyesore, a blight on the carefully curated aesthetic of the neighborhood, and that Sarah's refusal to comply with their orders was a flagrant disregard for the rules that all residents were expected to follow. But Sarah's legal team was more than prepared. They meticulously laid out the history of the carport, the countless hours of labor and love that her husband had poured into its construction, and the profound emotional significance it held for Sarah in the aftermath of his passing. They argued that the HOA's actions were not only a violation of Sarah's rights as a homeowner, but a cruel and heartless attempt to strip her of the last tangible connection she had to her beloved husband. As the arguments volleyed back and forth, the judge listened intently, her face a mask of impassivity. Sarah could feel the weight of the courtroom's gaze upon her, and she steeled herself, determined not to let the pressure of the moment break her resolve. Finally, the judge raised her hand, calling for silence in the room. "This is a complex and emotional case," she began, her voice measured and authoritative. "I've carefully considered the arguments presented by both sides, and I've come to a decision." Sarah held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest as the judge's words hung in the air. The fate of the carport, and the last connection to her husband, now rested in the judge's hands. The judge's words seemed to echo through the tense silence of the courtroom as all eyes turned to her, waiting with bated breath for the verdict. After careful consideration, the judge continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I have determined that the HOA's demand for the removal of Mrs. Hartley's carport is unjustified and a violation of her rights as a homeowner." A collective gasp of relief and surprise rippled through the audience, and Sarah felt her heart swell with a surge of hope. The judge raised her hand, silencing the murmurs. The carport, built by Mrs. Hartley's late husband, holds significant emotional value and is an important part of her family's legacy. While I understand the HOA's concerns about community guidelines, the rigid enforcement of such rules in the face of deeply personal circumstances is, in my opinion, an abuse of power. Ms. Wilson, the HOA president, rose from her seat, her face flushed with anger. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. The carport is a clear violation of our communities." The judge cut her off with a stern look. "I've made my decision, Ms. Wilson. The carport will remain, and I strongly advise the HOA to refrain from any further attempts to remove it or harass Mrs. Hartley." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her as she listened to the judge's words. Tears of joy brimmed in her eyes, and she turned to Alex, who had been by her side throughout the ordeal. a broad smile spreading across his face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Alex squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You never had to do it alone," he replied, his eyes shining with warmth and understanding. As the courtroom erupted into murmurs and applause, Sarah knew that this was more than just a victory for her. It was a triumph for all homeowners who had been subjected to the arbitrary and often oppressive rule of HOAs. This decision would set a precedent, a beacon of hope for those who refused to let their homes and memories be stripped away by the whims of overbearing associations. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah vowed to continue her fight, to use her platform to advocate for homeowners' rights and to ensure that no one else would have to endure the pain and struggle she had faced. The carport would remain a tangible reminder of her late husband's love and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. As she walked out of the courtroom, Sarah felt a weight lifted from her shoulders, and she knew that her husband was looking down on her, proud of the strength and determination she had shown in protecting the legacy he had left behind.